This is episode 105 of the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I'm Carly Cade, and today I'm speaking with Chad Oldfather. Chad has ridden horses just enough times to appreciate how difficult it is to do well. He has also mucked stalls, cleaned tack, stacked hay, helped fix fences, and logged hundreds of hours ringside as his daughters have taken lessons and ridden in shows. By day, he is a professor at Marquette University Law School, where, among other things, he teaches classes on and writes about judicial behavior, constitutional law, and the jurisprudence of sport, and serves on the board of advisors to the National Sports Law Institute. His non-legal writings have appeared in the Chronicle of the Horse, the World Equestrian Center magazine, and Harvard Magazine. Saddle up for a conversation with Chad about why he chose to write a personal memoir about his life, his daughters, and their experience with horses. You'll be moved by his dedication to his daughter's equestrian dreams, glean tips on parenting equestrians, including how to manage expectations in the sport, as well as insight on enjoying the little things. Chad believes that the best moments are not always on the biggest stages. Now, let's get into the interview. Welcome to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast, a podcast featuring interviews with equestrian authors who love all things horses and writing about them. In each episode, you'll hear inspirational stories from horsebook authors, including writing advice and marketing tips to help you write your very own horsebook. If you're an author, aspire to be an author, or simply love horsebooks, then you are in the right place. I'm your host, Carly Cade, and creative writing makes my spurs jingle. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I'm Carly Cade, and today I'm so excited to welcome Chad Oldfather to the show. Hi, Chad. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have you. I absolutely fell in love with your book, A Man Walks Into a Barn, which we're going to dive deep into. Your interaction with horses kind of came in a different sort of way, which I'm excited to talk to you about. I always start the interviews off with asking, how have horses touched your life?
Yeah, and as you just suggested, right, my answer to that is probably going to be a little bit different from most people's answer to that. In that for me it was kind of indirect, right, in the sense that I'm not the one who was drawn to horses in the way that people are drawn to horses. It was my daughters, who were, particularly my oldest daughter, when she was 2 years old. It just kind of came out of nowhere that she was really into horses, and the week before she'd been really into airplanes or something like that. And so we thought, well, here's a thing that'll stick around for a while, and then she'll be onto something else. And that's not how it unfolded at all. It stuck. So how have they touched my life? Well, certainly making me closer to my daughters, right? Getting to explore this world to them, which was unfamiliar to both of us. We're kind of, well, all of us, right? A lot of the initial journey occurred with my oldest daughter, but her younger sisters followed along as well. Right. And so getting to explore this world with them, having something always to talk about with them, and really, most importantly of all, just getting to spend time with them. Right. So that's one thing that happened. And then, of course, there were all these side benefits as well. I got out of it this large group of friends that I, are people I otherwise wouldn't have crossed paths with. Right. It's pretty easy in my life to spend time with, lots of other lawyers like me and academics like me. And because of horses, I got to know people, many of whom I still count as very good friends, who have all sorts of other lives. And that's been really rewarding and enjoyable as well. And, of course, I met a few horses along the way that I've become pretty fond of as well.
And I was really proud of you. I mean, even though the horses weren't your thing, you actually took a few riding lessons so you could get the feeling or understand a little bit about what your daughters were experiencing. I thought that was a really, really nice touch.
Yeah, it was a consistent thing. People along the way kept saying, well, now it's your turn to learn how to do this, because I was interested. It is fascinating in all sorts of ways. And I did a couple points along the line. And, I think just enough to realize just how hard it is to do well. And given the amount of other things that I'd like to do, I sort of had to decide, like, okay, is this something I want to devote a bunch of time to trying to figure out how to do well or not? And, so I still get to hang out with horses every now and then, and I enjoy that. But the riding part, I think I've learned enough to know that it would be harder to get as good at it as I would like to be, then I'm going to have time to devote to it.
Yeah, so you can testify to the fact that riders are not just sitting on their
Oh
horses,
yeah.
and the horses aren't doing all the work, right?
Right. No matter how easy it looks. I mean, I remember sitting there at the side watching these lessons, and hearing someone say for the 15th time, do this or do that thing, and sitting there and wondering, like, why can they not just do that? And then I'm sitting on top of a horse, and you start to think of one thing and you forget the other things you're supposed to be doing, and it all just kind of falls apart. So
Yeah.
yeah, I have a much, much greater appreciation for that.
Yeah, there's all these minute multitasking movements that you're doing to get the horse to where they want to be. So yeah, I'm really glad that you shared that with listeners. So as I said earlier, I loved your book. It was funny, it was deep, it was insightful. And you talked about all the friends that you made through the horse world, which they do show up in the book. Talk to us about your book, A Man Walks Into a Barn.
I mean, I guess I think of it as two things, I suppose. Like, one is it's just kind of this, basically a memoir, right? A straight up, more or less chronological account of this journey I took with my daughters, which is still ongoing, of course, through the horse world, right? Which for us involved time spent at really pretty much all levels of the sport, right? In multiple respects, right? At, of course, the beginning level riding, but also, we started out at a barn that that fills this really important niche in the horse world, which is one that's fairly accessible and affordable. Because when we started doing this, I was the sole person bringing in an income in our family, and it was the income of a professor, which is hardly a lucrative sort of career, right? So we found this place that would accommodate that, and it was a barn that went to schooling shows, really, for the most part, to the extent they did shows at all, and ended up with my daughters, getting to spend some time under the guidance of some of the most elite trainers in the sport, and competing at some of the venues where the elite folks really compete. And so getting to see all of that, and a lot of what's in between, I think is something that I just tried to tell that story because it seemed like an interesting story. And then the other part is offering commentary on what we saw, right? Some of it is just making observations on the ways in which watching my daughters acquire this set of skills, right? And the sort of increasing levels of depth and nuance that you have to accumulate as you go through it really sort of paralleled in lots of ways both my own experience in learning to become a lawyer, and hopefully getting good at being a lawyer, and also then in my career as a professor teaching people how to be lawyers, and trying to impart these skills where so much of what's involved in both is this feel, right? You have to just develop this intuition for what the problems are, what the right way to approach solving them are, and so forth. So there were really lots of parallels there that I thought were pretty interesting and worth developing. And then, some of it is more of the sort of commentary you'd expect, right? Here's some advice for whatever it's worth for parents. Here's some thoughts that maybe are of use to other people who have other roles in the horse world. There's a chapter, for example, that I kind of crowdsourced using my Facebook page to get suggestions for what would be some advice that you would give to trainers. Right? How should they go about doing their job? There's a chapter on the horse show judging structure, which I find frustrating in all sorts of ways. Particularly, as you know, I studied judging in the legal system as my main sort of scholarly focus. So I talk a little bit about that. There's some thoughts about what governing bodies of the sport might do better, because I'm also involved in sports law a little bit in my career. So I think about those sorts of things as well. I think there's a lot that could be fixed there, right? So ultimately, it's just this effort to provide an honest account of what I saw, hopefully of some use to some people, and most of all, hopefully something that people enjoy reading.
Yes, and it was definitely enjoyable. It was thought-provoking. And as I was going through here, I kept highlighting lines. I have all these earmarked pages in your book as I was reading it. And I love this here. One of the themes running through this book is that as a parent, you're constantly making decisions against a backdrop of deep uncertainty. I have a whole new respect for the horse show parent looking through your eyes as I was reading this book.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, I suppose it's true of lots of areas of life, right? You sort of imagine when you're younger that you'll figure things out someday, and you get far enough along the path and you realize that nobody really knows what they're doing, and we're all just kind of flying by the seat of our pants to some degree or other. And you got to figure out how to grapple with that. I don't know if you ever entirely get comfortable with it,
Mm.
but it's certainly a fact that's there.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think this is really kind of neat. Throughout the book, you mentioned that a lot of people have told you that they wish you were their dad. I found myself thinking the same thing as I read your book. Oh man, I wish he was my horse show dad. How does it make you feel hearing that people relate to you that way after seeing you interact with horses and your children?
Yeah, I mean, it feels pretty good, of course, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's at least some suggestion that that you're doing what you should be doing. But of course, at the end of the day, right there are three people, whose opinions matter when it comes to the answering that question, and they certainly understand that I'm not perfect, right? And that there were plenty of moments when I wasn't at my best, and they probably experienced the story a little bit differently than I did. So it's nice. And certainly, I was aiming for not necessarily to get other people to think that of me, but to get my daughters to think that of me, that, at the end of the day, 10, 20 years from now, hopefully they'll look back on it and say, yeah, he did all right.
Yeah, I mean, they got to achieve very high levels of the equestrian sport, and you were there rooting them on, standing ringside. I mean, and you sacrificed a lot of time and driving and miles to help them achieve their dreams. So good on you. I wanted to ask this too. Like, after all you've been through uh, with horses and as the parent of equestrians, what three things do you appreciate about horses most?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting question. I mean, so I think I've come to appreciate is just maybe call it horses for their own sake, right? Just how impressive they are as animals, right? In terms of
Mm.
just gracefulness and athleticism and talent and majesty and all those sorts of things, right? Also, how they each very much have their own personalities, right? That they are not the same horses, and in all the sorts of ways that people are not the same, and other animals, dogs certainly don't have the same personalities, right? But it's a different sort of relationship, than a relationship with a person or a relationship with a dog. It just is in ways that I don't know if I can fully articulate how. And then, of course, right, there's just this effect that they have on people. That's really there are not that many things that I think quite parallel it. People just if you're a horse person, you are a horse person, and that people structure their lives around spending time with horses in pretty much any way they can, and I admire that. And so you gotta tip your cap to an animal that can affect that many people that deeply.
Oh, yeah, said very well. And yes, we are a interesting herd of people who who love our horses more than anything. I mean, they are like our families. And if you really think about it, I've had my horse for 16 years since she was 3, my heart horse. And that's a lot of life that I've lived with her. And they can live to
Yeah,
be 30 years old. So that's a lot of time to have an animal that you keep for that long. So yeah,
right,
they're
right.
pretty special, and they are different. The interaction with them is different than people and dogs. Like, you hit that right on the head. I love that you wrote this book to give us a perspective of what it's like to be an equestrian parent. Do you have any tips that you could share with other equestrian parents on how to manage expectations, because you do address that in the book, and I thought that was a really important topic.
Yeah, it is, and it's one of those things that I certainly didn't fully appreciate going in, and I think it's natural for people, no matter what the context is, to always be kind of focusing on those who have more, right?
Mm.
The people who have got just a little bit more, right? You're always looking up the mountain, up the ladder, whatever the metaphor is that you want to use, and in the horse world, right, at the top of that mountain are people who have almost infinite wealth, effectively, right? Just have resources that are for practical purposes unlimited, certainly compared to those of us, almost all of the rest of us. And when I was a kid, it was certainly the case that there were people around me who had more, and I sort of understood on an abstract level that there were fantastically wealthy people, but that was just like a different world. And, I sort of imagined it, but it wasn't real to me in any significant sense. Whereas I think these days, there are a couple things that are different. I mean, one is once you reach a certain level of equestrian sport, right, you're suddenly competing with those people, right? So I've interacted with billionaires, and some of it has been at horse shows, and so now these people are not an abstraction; they're real, and they're going in the ring just in front of you, let's say. And then, I think one of the things that's really different today is that social media just makes it so much easier to see
Mm.
how much they've got, right? Because you follow them on Instagram or whatever, and there they are with their string of however many horses, and my daughters talk about this, right? They had one horse, right? And and that's the one that is that you've got to work with, and there's no possibility of adding a second one because it's all we can do to have the one, especially when you've got two daughters who are deeply involved in it. So it makes it even more challenging, I think, and more important to have a sense as early on in the journey as you can just how much of an uphill climb it is, right? If you set these lofty goals and to understand, look, you're gonna pretty quickly run into people who are going to be able to afford more things than you. It's easier, I think, now to appreciate that than when we started because there's just that much more information on the internet now. It's much more accessible, but people always want to believe what they want to believe, and there are plenty of people, and certainly this is true in the horse world, who are happy to tell us what they think we want to hear. And so it's easy to I think imagine that yours is going to be the fairy tale story, and maybe it will, but the odds are not in your favor when it comes to that. So and I think too, it's important to understand, and my daughters certainly do understand this, that getting to do it at all, right,
Yes.
is absolutely a privilege, right? And so you might be tempted to look at the kid with 6 horses, but there's somebody else who's looking at you with your one and is wishing they could be you. So it's important to appreciate that no matter how much somebody else might have, you've got something that's pretty significant too, and don't take that for granted.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just there are so many little girls that would dream of being able to do what your daughters did and see what they saw and have the caliber of horse that they had, and having a horse is a privilege in and of itself. So I think you said that really, really well. But yes, when you get to those higher levels, no matter what you're doing with horses, you're always going to get to a level where there's somebody that has infinitely more than you do. If you could choose one moment from your horse journey or one moment of your journey as a horse dad to share with listeners, what would it be? It could be funny, it could be serious, it could be anything.
Yeah, I mean, so there are so many, right? It's hard to pick a single one. I keep going back to the best moments being the little ones, right?
Mm.
Not the you just had a successful round or whatever. Maybe a trip in the car. Probably something along the lines of kind of when we got the first horse we ever owned, and we were at this barn called Hidden View Farm, and we'd usually go up there, and it was then all three were riding, and we'd go up, and they had to kind of share time on Cash, the horse. And we'd get to the barn, and it's winter, and it's dark, and it's cold, and usually it was just us in this beautiful converted old dairy barn that's become a horse barn. And I don't know, that was just kind of cool, right? Just feeling like we were in our own world, figuring all this out, and most of it was still ahead, and it was all learning and possibility, and that was pretty cool.
Oh, that's so lovely. And I can, those are the moments that you talk a lot about in the book, are just those special bonding moments on the journey to where you were heading and the dreams you were chasing with your daughters. And in fact, I underlined kind of exactly what you said in the book. The best moments are not always on the biggest stages. It's such a great book. I really like it. The Wall Street Journal actually named A Man Walks into the Barn in a feature called 10 Books to Read, the Best Reviews of March. And that was this year. Congratulations, that is
Yeah,
amazing.
thanks.
I love seeing an equestrian book, in that group in the Wall Street Journal. How did that make you feel?
Yeah, I mean that was pretty wild. So I've done. I'm a law professor by day, and part of that involves writing. So I've done lots of writing and published lots of things, and usually you send it out in the world, and you maybe get a couple of emails a little while after it appears, and if you're lucky, you'll get a couple invitations to go talk somewhere. But there's not much fanfare usually that's built into the publishing I've done. So to have something like that happen was pretty cool, and it was not something I was expecting. And then of course you hear from an interesting array of people from your past when something like that happens too. So yeah, that was pretty exciting.
That was amazing. I was so pleased to see that. You've mentioned a few times you're a lawyer and you're a professor at Marquette University Law School, and you do writing and you teach classes and you practice law. What did you have to like shift sides of your brain to go from writing in a lawyerly way or a legal way to writing about equestrians? Because I know you've done some work for equestrian publications. Did it just come naturally to write in both realms, or did you have to tone down to write A Man Walks into the Barn?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a different voice, so to
Mhm.
speak, that I use in one versus the other. I mean, I do try to write clearly, no matter what I write, which some people find surprising in a lawyer. But I think I think it's a good plan. So yes, I did have to change, and it was one of these things where I had kind of always had it in my mind that I wanted to do some non-legal, non-academic writing, and I had to figure out what to write about. And I found myself sitting ringside watching all of this learning going on, and puzzling over it and thinking, all right, well, this is kind of what I do, right? I have thoughts and I have questions, and I just sort of work my way through them in writing. And maybe there's an audience for this. And somewhere along the line, I had learned of the Chronicle of the Horse and been reading it a little bit. And so I sent off a proposal to Molly Sorgi, who at the time was coordinating the blogging that was going on there, and she said, "Yeah, let's give it a whirl and see how it goes." So that was how it started. Fortunately, was pretty well received, and then somewhere along the line, it's the next step is, well, let's take that and use it as the starting point for a book. That led pretty naturally to it ultimately becoming a book. And of course, back to the connection to the law, right? As I already mentioned, right? I saw these natural connections there,
Mhm.
so it was easy to kind of explore some territory that I'm thinking about in both contexts.
Yeah, and you did it so well. And I was just wondering if it was tricky, if you had to switch, sides of your brains, or
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely like I'm clearly thinking, and I don't even know how to describe how it goes on. But yes, I'm. It's like, okay, take the lawyer hat off now and put on the writing for a larger, different audience hat, and try to imagine. You're always trying to imagine who your reader is to
Mm,
some degree or other, and just understanding that, okay, this is somebody else who's trying to get something different out of what I'm writing here. So
mhm.
let me think about what they might be interested in hearing.
That's great. I mean, so you got into what your reader would want to read and made it clear. And I found it clever and witty and very educational and informational and touching. I mean, it had all the elements that a reader would want in a good book. So you did that very well.
Thank you, thank you.
Now, your publisher is Trafalgar Square Books. I've interviewed a lot of your fellow authors in the Trafalgar herd. It's they're so wonderful over there. How did you end up connecting with Trafalgar Square, and what's it been like working with them?
So I had this idea that I was going to write a book, and for a while I for not very long actually, I think I would say I tried the, like, oh well, let's find an agent and try to do it the way that apparently you're supposed to do it. And I thought I had a pretty good proposal, but one of the things that I heard from people with some familiarity with that world was like, okay, well, these agents are getting lots and lots of pitches for horse books, and that you're just kind of going to be fighting an uphill battle when you're doing that. And so, at some point, not too far down the line, I realized, like, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to do it now before I forget, before I've completely lost touch with the reality of this, because my daughters, they're now all in college, and so it's a much less regular activity for me than it was. And I knew that Trafalgar was kind of the place for horse books, and so I sent a proposal off, and fortunately it was well received, and they've been tremendous to work with. Right, it's been, at this point, I sort of feel like I'm working with friends, right,
Mm,
as much as anything. It's been great, and a part of me, like, I don't for myself necessarily have any, grand needs for this to sell a lot of books or whatever, but I'd like it to do well for them, right? Because
mhm,
that's their business. And
mhm.
so don't buy it for me, buy it for them.
I think it's a perfect match. I mean, and they have the connections with tax stores and the
Yeah.
horse people, and it's a perfect fit for you. And they are wonderful. And I love the cover. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the cover here? I think it's
Yeah.
so.
I mean, I could not have, I want people to judge the book by the cover because
Mhm.
it is so extraordinarily well done. Rebecca at Trafalgar Square did it, and she was tremendous to work with. And I actually, I told her at one point, I'm like, I've uh, never never really thought about getting a tattoo, but I think if I were to get one, I might, like, have this design somehow turned into one because
Awesome. You could have
because
it done on your whole back.
yeah,
You could be a walking billboard
yeah,
for your book.
yeah. And the only the feedback I got from within the family was I have to include all three daughters in the in the tattoo rather than just the two who are on the cover. But also the man on the cover seems to have hair, and as you can tell, I don't. So it's not actually us.
That's so funny. I love that. And the girls have apples in their hands. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a barn, and I love the colors. They're very vivid.
yeah. It is. It's just
I mean,
extraordinarily
I
well
would
done.
pick this up walking through a bookstore for sure.
Yeah.
I like to ask this question because it's always really insightful and the answers are always different. What do you wish you had known when you first started out as a horse dad or as a writer, or maybe both?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk a little bit about both of those. I think as a horse dad, I mean, I've talked about some of it, but to maybe come at it a little bit differently, I think something I did not appreciate was how different this world is from the world of youth sports generally. And
Mm,
that's true in a couple of senses, right? One we've talked about, right? There's the significance of money, right? That wealth seems to matter, which is true in a lot of other sports too, but maybe not to the same degree. There's the fact that it's year round, right? Once you have a horse, there's no off season in a sense, right? It needs to be taken care of all the time, and so you're devoting your entire calendar year to it. And I think as well, you just end up having this very different relationship with a trainer and with a barn family, right? Which is really an accurate label for what the relationships end up being, because you're spending all of this time there with the same people who are also spending all of their time there, and your trainer, or as you'd normally think of it, coach, is also just tends to be around all the time. And so you're interacting in ways and in contexts that aren't just about learning the sport. And so the nature of the relationships becomes much more intense in some ways, and comprehensive, and so forth. And that can cause complications sometimes, for sure, because there are ways in which families are dysfunctional, and there are ways in which barn families can become dysfunctional as well. I think a huge plus, at least the way my daughters experienced it, was that barn family, the riders, were people of all ages, right? And so they're interacting with adults as as peers to a degree that just isn't true in other sports contexts, and that was very helpful, I think, because I can remember instances where my daughters were asked for advice by people decades older than they were, and gave advice, and it was taken seriously, and that's just an extraordinary thing. So it's a different world, for sure, a very different world. And I contrast it with that being a figure skating parent, and that was much more of a traditional thing where it was, you know, you kind of drop the kid off for the lesson, and then maybe you're around or not, but you can't watch quite as closely. Easily, at least, as you can with horses. And then traveling to competitions, right? The parents tended to be kind of segregated off, and the kids went elsewhere. So it's a little bit different in that way. And in terms of being a writer, I think the advice there is maybe a little bit of a classic, which is it always takes longer than you think it will. I revise a lot. I could easily go back through this book and probably change about 10% of what's there, just because that's just how I do it every time I revisit a text. So it takes a lot of time. It's never going to be perfect. And there's always just this roller coaster to the experience that I'd have some familiarity with, because I've done writing in other contexts. So, but a book is just another sort of animal, and I've recently taken to analogizing it to something else I started doing, just as crazy, I suppose, a thing I started doing over the last couple of years, which is I've run a couple ultra marathons, and the process seems kind of similar in some respects, because it's you start out, you're like, hey, this is fun, I'm out here running through the woods, this is great, and then after a while you're like, okay, getting there, and this isn't quite as much fun anymore, but I'm going to keep going. And then at a certain point you're like, I'm tired and I'm starting to hurt. And then at some point you resolve to yourself, you know what, I'm going to finish this, and then I'm never ever doing this ever again. And then of course 2 days later you're like, all right, well, let me try to figure out when the next one's going to be. So there's some parallels.
That sounds about right. Yeah, definitely. And you talked about the roller coaster. Did you have any hesitations, or did you have any feelings around releasing something so personal about you and your family into the world through book form? Is there any?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly some moments, like the day before it was coming out, I'm like, I don't know, I hope I didn't say anything I wish I hadn't said.
Yeah.
And I certainly edited things out, and it is a very personal book, and I guess I got comfortable with that partly by just being far enough along in life that I'm like, hey, this is who I am, and this is how I see things. Not everybody's going to like that necessarily or be drawn to it, and that's fine.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a hat all creative writers, all writers have to kind of put on. It's like somebody said it to me best. It's like, does everyone like Diet Coke? No, I don't like Diet Coke. So like you cannot create one thing that everyone appreciates, and you have to be ready for that ride. I think we kind of touched on a little bit of the difficult part of being a writer and author. Can you share like some of the, what was the best part about doing this, or writing about horses? Yeah,
sure. I mean, I think, so right, the difficult part is that roller coaster where at some point you start out thinking it's great, and then after a while you think it's just awful and you should completely throw it away. I think the best parts, are these, right? In general, and I haven't done it with this book yet because it's too fresh, but every now and then I'll go back and read something I read, and you're always a little bit terrified, right? Mm-hmm. Because usually the first thing you see is a typo when you open up something you've written. But occasionally I've had the experience of reading something like, actually that I wrote that pretty well. And that's always kind of fun. But like with this book, the cool part has just been getting feedback from people, getting correspondence, right? Where it's, I had a long email exchange with someone who was one of the corner office partners at the law firm I started working at when I was just a baby lawyer, right? Mm-hmm. Who apparently still reads the Wall Street Journal, because that's how he found me. And so, I struck up that correspondence, and then just hearing things from others who have, either gone down the same path as the father of equestrians, been the daughter in the relationship. I haven't had a chance to read. I got an actual physical piece of mail that it's a 3-page single-spaced letter from somebody who's like, well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what it's like from the grandparents' perspective now that I've gone that far down the road.
Wow.
So, just knowing that people related to it and connected to it, that's pretty nice.
Yeah. It's very relatable. And then, obviously the Wall Street Journal coverage was extraordinary, and you probably reached a lot of readers that way. What other things have you and your publisher been doing to get the word out about this?
Yeah, book? I mean, trying to do as much as we can. Things obviously like this interview is one such thing. The Chronicle of the Horse invited me to come back and do another blog post, which was basically about the book, and so that was a thing. I'm on social media. It's kind of a weird mix because I'm wearing I'm on Twitter, but wearing multiple hats on Twitter. Some of which are law professor hats, a little bit of which is horse dad hat, and some of which is just kind of being what I think is humorous. Which your mileage may vary there. Same thing with Instagram, right? It's for whatever reason, a bunch of my current and former students have followed me on Instagram, and so some of that's just trying to be like a little bit more relatable and a little bit less intimidating in the way that students often think professors are. So it's just kind of goofiness with fewer horses than there used to be, but occasionally I'll sneak in a photo of that. I do have a Facebook page that's more expressly devoted to the horse side of things. So which is I think the title of it is the Chronicles of a Horse Dad, which I started when I was blogging for the Chronicle. So that's the origin of that. A little bit of those sorts of things, and then just kind of trying to get people to take a look at it in whatever context they might be in. If anybody out there, I saw that Mark Wahlberg posted a photo on social media of his equestrian daughter the other day. So if anybody has any connections to him and could get a copy in his hands, that would be great as well.
And Bruce Springsteen, yeah,
right, yeah,
he
right.
He gets a mention in the book too,
and he does, yeah, and I hope he makes it that far along. Which I mean, of course, also means I hope he somehow gets a copy.
Yeah. Every horse parent needs this book, or anyone that's in that role of kind of shepherding young people through the sport needs to read this book. It's fantastic. That being said, have you listened to or read anything lately? It doesn't have to be horse related that has inspired you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading all the time, and I've made a decision over the last few years, and particularly once my daughters got old enough to start driving, and now that they're in college, which just freed up a little bit more time for me to start reading more things that have nothing to do with law, more fiction, creative nonfiction, whatever it might be. So, I've read in terms of fiction a couple books by an author named Rachel Kushner that just absolutely blew me away in terms of her use of language and so forth. Nonfiction, Leslie Jameson. There's a book called The Empathy Exams that I really liked. I'll plug somebody else's book with a cover, but this is like a work of professional philosophy. It's a book called Knowing Our Limits by a guy named Nathan Ballantyne, who's a professor at Fordham, but it's actually funny and really readable, and really just this important meditation on the importance for all of us of being humble about what we know and what we don't know, and I think it's just a tremendous message for for the moment we live in right now, where there's a little less humility on display than I'd like to see. So, there's that, and then in terms of listening to things, I listen to a ton of music, and again, I'm always looking for somebody who, because right, I work in the world of words, and somebody who uses words well. I'm one of those people who's driven by lyrics a lot.
This is a professor, folks, so let's take his reading recommendations to heart. But also on the music side, I was so touched by the fact that you put together playlists for your girls when you were driving to the barn or going to horse shows. So I thought that was really cool. Their musical connection came into the book as well.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, and it's right. We had a set list. It's a proprietary recipe, so I can't disclose it right here, but of songs that especially if we were staying at a hotel at a horse show, it was always every morning we pull out of the parking lot, and there was a certain order of songs that was just part of the ritual. And then as the book, and it's actually worked into the physical design of the book, one of the favorites was the song Wagon Wheel. Just 2 nights ago, I think, my daughter Audrey was out at a restaurant and they were playing it, so she sent me a Snapchat. Yeah.
Those are the moments. I mean, those are the
right.
things that the best memories and moments are made from. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, just the minute she hears that song, she thinks of Dad and the time you spent together. I mean, that is so touching. I love that.
Yeah.
And then, what are you curious about? Like, what's next? Do you have another horse book in you, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, so I'm curious about lots of things. I mean, a lot of it, right, which is tied to the books I mentioned earlier, but I've really fascinated, and I've always been fascinated by, I guess, what's ultimately just human psychology, right? All of the various blind spots that we all have, and of course, since they're blind spots, we don't know we have them. All the reasons for us to be tentative and humble about what we know and think we know, which these days seems to be kind of a big ask of a lot of people to acknowledge that.
Mm.
Right, and it's true on an individual level and true on a wider social level too. And I'm fascinated by both of those things. And so I'm kind of thinking about, and I'll try to tie these two ideas together because they may not seem like they go together at first, but trying to sort of work that into maybe doing a book that tells the story of my hometown, which I discuss a little bit in the book. Right, I grew up in this very, very small town in Minnesota, and like a lot of small towns in anywhere, it's been affected by all of these larger social forces that have made farms larger, and there are therefore fewer people on farms, which means there are fewer people to feed into these communities. And meanwhile, all of the larger forces in the world have drawn people like me away from the small towns, right? So they're just very different places than they were, I think, in their heyday, which is before I grew up. But even when I grew up, which was kind of at the point of where a lot of this was coming to an end. And and the place was just really, I think, and maybe this is wrong, but I think it was a unique sort of place with a unique kind of culture, very much focused on the importance of education and the importance of community.
Mm.
And so something really significant seems to have been lost. And I'm not saying it's lost completely, but it's different. And I think somehow or other exploring that history and this just sort of moment in time where these little towns on the prairie kind of blossomed for just an instant in historical terms, and now they're not doing so well for the
Mm.
most part. So, I think that's probably the next book project. I've also got you know an outline of some sort of fiction type thing, drawing out of our experiences in the horse world. That's a different, they're talking about putting on a different hat, right? To all of a
Mm.
sudden make up a story is
Yeah.
is another thing entirely. So I don't know. I've got a lot of things I want to do, and only so many hours in the day.
I know, isn't that the thing? There
Yeah,
are so many eager people that want to do so many things. There's only so much time in the day. I agree, but I think the project on the small town and how things have changed is fascinating. I would definitely be interested in reading that. And then fiction, everybody's got to try their hand at
yeah,
that. So
right.
that sounds really fun too. I mean, if it's half as good and half as funny as this, it would be majorly successful. And you already have a foot in the horse book world, so it's
Right,
perfect.
right.
And then, final question: what does creativity mean to you?
That's a great question. I think, like I said before, I work with words and concepts, and so I tend to think of it through that sort of lens, rather than a visual artist might think of it very differently, of course, musician. So I think of it in terms of making connections between things that aren't obviously connected, maybe expressing an old idea in a new way, putting something in a new or different light, or just sometimes I think a creative choice is deciding what parts of a story not to tell, what
Mm.
gaps to leave to leave there for the reader to fill with their imagination. I don't know. One of the really fun and exciting parts of writing this book was thinking about how to structure it, right? And that's a problem that comes up in the context of writing a book that doesn't when you're writing a blog post, or at least doesn't in the same way. And so that was a bit of a challenge to try to figure that out. So it's sort of like solving a puzzle, but you're also actually making the puzzle that you're solving, and so it's fun.
Yeah. Oh, I love that answer. That was perfect. And yeah, you're right about structure. How would you structure this? It starts when they're just little. Your oldest daughter was just little, and then all the way up until college. So uh, that's a lot to think about. And I like
Yeah,
how you said what to leave out and where to leave the gaps for your reader to let their mind get creative as well. I think that's really interesting. And then paralleling two different things and seeing where they can unite. I love that. Great answer. Chad, I have so enjoyed having you on the show today. Thank you for coming on and giving me the gift of your time. Would you share where listeners can find out more about you and your books?
sure. Well, and before I do that, thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun, and I truly appreciate your time and interest as well. So that's a two-way street. Yeah, and finding out more about me, I mean, it's I'm on Twitter and Instagram, both as at Oldfather C. So fairly easy to find. I've got my name's unique enough that I'm not too hard to hunt down. The other one you'll find is in uh, Kansas. He and I are Facebook friends, which is kind of weird. We've never met, but there are two Chad Oldfathers out there. And then on Facebook, under the Chronicles of a Horse Dad, is where I do most of the horse focused social media. So those are the places.
Nice. And the book is available at horseinriderbooks.com, where you can go and grab a copy. And I'm sure all the other places where horse books are sold, but let's support Trafalgar Square Books and buy it from its publisher.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I highly recommend this book. And Chad, I wish you so much success. Thank you again for the gift of your time.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I hope you enjoy these Q&A sessions with wonderful equine authors who love all things horses and riding, just like me. Visit my website, carlycadecreative.com, where you can read the show notes, and make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you so much for your support. Want a free guide to secrets of horsebook authors? Gallop over to carlycadecreative.com/wisdom to have author advice delivered instantly to your inbox. If you are an author who writes about horses and would like to be spotlighted, please let me know. Visit my contact page at carlycadecreative.com to fill out a request. I'd be happy to have you on the show too. Thank you for tuning in to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. See you next time. I'm your host, Carly Cade. Creative writing makes my spurs jingle.